There is a lyric in a Stevie Ray Vaughan song that says, "Looking back in front of me." I love that line. To me, it means that even though we go forward in life, we drag the past with us. I'm sure Stevie meant something entirely different. So, why am I talking about a Stevie Ray Vaughan song? Well, because that lyric, "looking back in front of me," reminds me of an old book I read not too long ago called Looking Backward. It was written by Edward Bellamy and published in 1888. Looking Backward was a utopian science fiction novel that was the first of its kind, and it inspired a political mass movement in the late 1800s. Ever hear of it? No? Well, me neither. The story was about this guy, Julian West, who fell asleep in 1887 and didn't wake up until the year 2000. So, after sleeping over 100 years, the world changed a little bit for him. Looking Backward was Bellamy's vision of what the future could look like. The story was very original for the year 1888. I saw this book sitting on a friend's dusty bookshelf and thought it would be a great read. Unfortunately, it turned out to be a snoozer. One reason was because it was written in 1888, which is a little dated for me as far as literature goes. You know, too many words. The other reason I didn't care for it was because Edward Bellamy had an axe to grind. To him, life and society in general was dreadful, and he wanted to change it. Life was kind of crummy back in 1888, I suppose. You know, no indoor plumbing. So, in his book, Bellamy fixed everything by creating a utopian future with no poverty and plenty of indoor plumbing. So everyone was happy. Now, I should remind you non-history buffs that in the late 1800s, socialism was gaining traction with the working class. They weren't real happy about their current conditions. I think Karl Marx had something to do with that. I know, right? This guy had great hair. I, of course, didn't think about Karl or his manifestos when I picked this book up. I thought it was a science fiction novel. But after some research, I discovered Looking Backward was one of the most popular books written in the 1800s. I'm serious. Only Uncle Tom's Cabin and Ben-Hur sold more books. This book was translated into 20 languages and sold worldwide. As a result of its popularity, hundreds of Bellamy clubs sprang up to discuss the socialist utopia he was advocating. These fanatics called themselves Bellamyites and started the nationalist clubs, who quickly became a force in politics. These nationalist clubs then evolved into the Populist and People's Party. Ever hear of William Jennings Bryan? Eugene Debs? They were kind of the original Bernie Sanders and credited this book as their inspiration. Looking Backward spoke to what was happening in America during the Gilded Age. But since it was tied to socialism, it started to die out early the next century. So why had I never heard of Edward Bellamy or this book? It could be because Bellamy only wrote a few books and died of tuberculosis in 1898 when he was only 48 years old. But I think the real reason I never heard of him was because this book wasn't available in my school library back in the day. There weren't many books in the schools I attended promoting socialism. And that's exactly what this book was pushing. Okay, so why would I bother to read this outdated book now? Well, I thought it'd be fun to see what an 18th century author predicted for my lifetime. I was sure there was going to be some wild guesses like 8-minute trips to the moon or something. But no, nothing like that. In fact, there were only 3 references to any kind of new technology in this entire novel. In Bellamy's book, the year 2000 looked a lot like the year 1887. Even the fashion stayed the same. The man had no imagination. Bellamy did describe a huge umbrella or a covering that came out in Boston during rainstorms. This was all set in Boston, by the way, which is where Bellamy lived, and apparently rain falling on your head was a pain. So he fixed it. Another prediction he had was this radio-type device that played music. Bellamy called it a telephone. So, he got part of it right. The last technology he described was a general going up in a balloon to direct a 1,000,000-man army. Bellamy never said who they were fighting. But that's it. Just 3 things. A big umbrella, a telephone that plays music, and a balloon that really wasn't anything new. Obviously, I was disappointed. What Bellamy did describe in nauseating detail was this new world order of his. He picked every little social problem of his time and fixed it in the year 2000. He basically wrote a guidebook on how the country should be run. There were no more politicians, which I'm good with if you get rid of the right ones, and no government, just civil workers. And since women couldn't vote in 1888, he fixed it in the future. Well, he kind of fixed it. Women could vote in the future, but they could only vote for other women. You heard me correctly. Women could only vote for other women. And since there were no politicians, the generals ran everything. And there were some women generals who, got the women's vote, I guess. But men still ran things in the year 2000. You went to school until you were 21, and then you entered a profession or a job they thought suited you. I probably would have been a dishwasher. And everyone retired at age 45. Bellamy eliminated capitalism, so there were no stores or restaurants or even companies. There was only a big warehouse you went to for picking out stuff. And the stuff arrived at your home before you got there, which sounds kind of like Amazon. Okay, the drone was my idea. That's not in his book. There were no need for banks or financial institutions because there was no money. Citizens were issued a card they punched holes out of for the meals or clothes they got. And everything was run by this army industry who operated community kitchens that cooked and delivered your meals. Oh, and there was no crime. Or hardly any crime, I should say. To Bellamy, it was hereditary if you were a criminal. So they sent criminals to the insane asylum, which took them and their gene pool out of society. Like forever. Why didn't we think of that? Okay, this book was written over 130 years ago, so I'm going to give Bellamy a break. He did say women achieved equality, but he didn't quite demonstrate this equality in his book. According to Bellamy, women had paid their dues in history and were entitled to a soft life, which included no housework and no cooking. All women did in this utopia was listen to music on the telephone and read books. And procreate, I guess. So, listen to music, read books, and get pregnant. I think Bellamy thought he was doing women a favor. And maybe he was because women in the Bellamy clubs thought it was a great idea. There was also no mention of race other than Julian West having an African-American servant named Sawyer, who tragically died in a house fire. Sawyer was the only one in this book who wasn't white, so not everyone enjoyed Bellamy's utopia. Church was still big, of course, but the sermons were about how bad it was in 1887. Like I said, Bellamy had an axe to grind. Obviously, looking backward had its critics over the years. George Orwell was one of them. Orwell usually mocked socialist utopias and took jabs at the idealist who created them. He wrote that these utopias were going to be the exact opposite of what the old reformers, like Bellamy, imagined. Orwell was predicting dystopia, not utopia. There were plenty of George Orwell books in my school's library that were required reading, which should tell you something. Thankfully, neither Bellamy nor Orwell's predictions have come true. So, maybe I should rewrite some of this stuff and bring it up to date. Create a little better utopia. And we'll start up some Road Trip Joe clubs. How's that? This could be a whole new movement, with free ice cream on the days that end with Y and 24/7 happy hours. Let me see. The book needs a new name, I guess. How about Looking Back in Front of Me? Yeah, perfect. Be looking for it on your dusty bookshelf. That's all I got.